But we're going to start with sitting cross legs for a few minutes. I have a couple of blankets out. If you feel like you would do better with more height, then don't hesitate to grab another blanket or to use a bolster and some blankets. But we're going to sit with the right leg crossed in front of the left. And I like to show a couple of variations of this as we set it up. But with two blocks around, you could place blocks on any of their heights so that your outer legs are resting on them. And for people with some flexibility in their hip sockets, they might feel like, well, I can drop my knees down, so I don't need that. But there's something kind of nice about having that lift from underneath. So that's one option. Another one would require an additional blanket, which we have plenty of in the studio. But you could open a blanket so it's just folded in half and then do sort of a zigzag loose fold. And then I go over my feet and under my knees for that. And I think that one's good for anybody who just hates that pressure on their feet. So these are just a couple of options. I like to give people a few things to think about. You can also fold or roll. I'll do mine kind of messy just to kind of show it quickly so that you have some support where the shins are crossing. And sometimes that's like a twofer, like it prevents this pressure on the feet and it lifts the knees up a little bit. So a few options in case you wanted to exercise any of them. Otherwise, we'll sit with the right leg crossed in front of the left. And I want you to think about sitting close up towards that front edge of your blankets or your blankets plus bolster, whatever you might have put together. And then once you have that like scooching forward accomplished, let's press the fingers either into the floor. You could also use blocks back there or maybe on the edges and corners of those blankets. And as you have this, if you can stand it, we're going to press with the fingertips rather than the knuckles or the fists. And as you press down, use that to sit yourself way up. Yeah, nice. And as you press down, if you can, have a bend in the elbows. Use that to straighten the elbows for a moment, shoulders come up, and then bend the elbows as you bring the shoulders back and down. Nice. And then we'll swing the elbows towards each other. Last few breaths while you press with those hands. Could you one more time climb up the height of the spine? At the same time, relax your legs downwards. So if all this sitting up taller had your knees lifting, here we'll think about those knees coming down. And if you selected to put blocks at the knees, could you gently press the legs down? These look good. All right, we'll unplug the hands from pressing down. We'll put the palms on the legs. And for a few moments, we'll sit. You could do this with your eyes closed or your eyes hazily unfocused and just sort of aiming to the near space ahead of you. But we're essentially dimming the eyes for a moment. So whether they're closed or just a little unfocused, that's fine. But we do that to recede our attention away from the external. So for a few moments, not picking up too much interest and intrigue through the eyes, can you get a sense of what it feels like to sit? When I teach, whether it's, the old school version with people in the room, or whether it's through an online format, I view my role as trying to provide lots of like objective information, like a hip does this, try a blanket for that. And then I view my students of having the role as like taking all that in and filtering it through their subjective experience. And some of us will find that sitting for a few moments is like pretty nice, and other people will feel fidgety and are just counting the bloody seconds as they go by. When can we get out of this? And there isn't a good, better, or best thing to understand, to feel, to find, to experience, but rather to bring yourself to that sense of presence. So you do develop an understanding of what's going on in the postures, not because I can explain it, though I hope that helps, but because you're the one who's doing it. With the hands on the legs, I want you to consider this. I don't want you to lean into them, nor do you have to forcefully press them down. But could you imagine here that your hands just grow gradually heavier and warmer on your legs to prevent those legs from lifting up with their accustomed tension and reactivity? And so it's subtle. I mean, I could lean forward into my hands and really push down, but rather than that, I'm going to sit back, sit tall, and just imagine here that like just through like my force field, I could press those legs down. All right, let's give ourselves a break from sitting in the legs crossed position. From here, it'll be pretty simple, but if you like to watch visually, you might like want to plug your eyes on me for a second, but we're going to uncross the legs and have them outstretched ahead of us. We're going to stay in this position for a moment. I'm going to spin to the side such that I might provide you with a little bit more to see if you're checking in visually. So once I come from cross legs to straight legs, it's a very different posture. So I'll need to kind of like fidget around a little bit on my seat. I'll take a moment to really see that my legs are reaching out ahead of me. But then one more time, let's press the fingers in. And I know that fingertip pressure can be really unfavored by people. So if it's really intolerable, you could go to fists or knuckles, but try those fingertips for a moment. And as you press down, sit yourself up taller. Roll the shoulders back and down. Bring the elbows closer towards each other. And give yourself just another breath or two. Could you sit up any last little speck of height taller? And then just like when our legs were crossed, we're going to bring our hands onto our legs. And just like when our legs are crossed, we're not going to lean into the hands or really try to apply like force or pressure. But just imagine here that your hands could grow just a little heavier and guide those thighs towards the floor. We'll give it a couple of breaths, a couple of inhales and exhales. I think it takes a lot of skill, strength, mobility to be able to sit with the legs out straight without the legs freaking out and without the back getting really taxed and tired. So we're going to kind of encounter that edge for just a moment. What a lot of us will do is we'll use the muscles on the front of the thigh as a group. They're known as the quadriceps. And those quadriceps will get really rigid, will like stiffen the legs, and we'll use that to kind of pull the pelvis forward because that approximates us sitting up a little taller. So I just want you to notice that as we take a breath or two. If you were to like squeeze and palpate around the thighs, do they feel really reactive and tense? You know, as a massage therapist, people never ask to have their quads worked on because it's like, oh, that's too much. Because they tend to be like perpetually rigid. And you might even notice if you can like push your kneecap around a little bit, you might find that as you're sitting, your legs are rock solid. And then whatever you uncover from there, we're going to sit on the other side of cross legs. So the left leg will now cross in front of the right one. And we're going to sit with the left leg crossed. We'll give it a few breaths and then we'll go back to legs extended and then we'll come to a reclining position. But once more, fingertip pressure. This, I think for a lot of people, it's like automatic, like fingers pressed, chest lift. So let's use that, like improve your sitting posture. These look nice because your hands are pressing down. It's like scaffolding behind the spine. But I think we could also do like a pretty righteous shoulder roll and drag those shoulder blades down. Elbows a little bit bent. Can you squeeze them towards each other behind your back so you're opening the front of the shoulder? And as you sit really tall, because the hands are pressing down, can you gently push the thighs towards the floor? And again, if you've got blocks right there, perfect. Could you connect to the blocks with just like an ounce more of pressure? And then we'll unplug the hands, bring the hands to the legs, and we'll give it a few breaths right here. Playing with this light application of our own hands on our legs, I'm going to think here about sinking down the heel of each hand. So there's a gentle pressure here. And as I press down, I'm not really trying to relocate my legs in the pose because essentially once we sit cross-legged, our knees come to a position that for most of us is sort of like, that's where they go. But as I have that sense of rooting downwards, I'm also going to push slightly forward. So I'm not trying to like glide and rub my leg, but I'm sinking and sort of plowing forward a little bit. And from there, one more time, I'm going to think about sitting up a little taller as those legs come on down. All right. And then the second time here, we're gonna go back to having the legs extended out straight. So uncrossing. And then for me, I feel a little like fidgety about it. I'm gonna move a little bit further forward on my blanket. Set my legs so they're straight, toes pointing towards the ceiling. And once more, hand pressure so that you sit yourself up taller. It's like in half a second, you could actually lift your backside off of the floor. We don't have to, but you can kind of imagine that. And then we'll unplug, settle the hands down. And again, can you press down and press slightly forward? And I'm doing this, essentially right in front of my pelvis. So for most people, like there's this bulk of the quadriceps muscles, and then it kind of narrows down as it turns into a tendon. So I'm kind of just behind the bulk and mass of those quads, pushing down gently, not a lot of force here, and kind of plowing forward. And using that to lift my tailbone behind me to sit up even taller. And then as you work with this, how rigid, how reactive the legs. It's like they tend to feel really like electrocuted in this pose, like they're as firm as they could be. So as you're here, can you imagine like asking these quads to ease off a little bit? All right. And then we'll unplug the hands from that position and just give yourself another breath or two, legs straight. Could you sit any taller, this time without pushing in any way with the hands? Just the hands are comfortable and easy. Could you lift the tailbone behind you? Could you imagine that low back drawing in? And what's the reaction around the hips and legs? Does anybody feel like their knees and like thighs get like really grabby and grippy? I can see it on a few of you. Don't even have to answer me. All right, let's go ahead and slide out of that. So we're gonna work some things today that kind of like keep on identifying what those thighs like to do. So the next two things we're gonna do are kind of subtle, and I really like teaching that way because I also really like practicing that way. So you're not gonna see like a big move coming, but what I'd like you to find here is your strap, and you're gonna put a loop in it. So you put the tail through both loops, then you open the loops apart and then flip the tail back through that further loop. Even to describe it makes it sound more confusing than it actually is. So just buckle your belt, we'll leave it at that. And then while you're sitting up, I'd like you to set your legs to your pelvic width distance. So your pelvic width distance here, as measured by your bones, not by like how wide your hips on the external. So for most people, there's only like 6 to 8 inches between their 2 feet. But once you have that, you're gonna make this loop pretty small, and you're gonna put it around your 2 big toes. And this all happens when we're sitting up, but we're gonna lie back in a moment, and knowing that I've put a blanket out for the back of my head. And just because we're still sitting up and it might be helpful, I'm just gonna make mine just a wee bit more snug. And I'm pulling my legs apart with this. This is also in case anybody ever looks at their feet and they're like, check out the bunion. This is really nice bunion therapy. So it pulls the big toes to point straight forward, whereas in a bunion, the big toe tends to cross over. So we've got that little added bonus in the background. But what I want you to get a sense of is that your legs are at hips width distance and you're pushing your legs apart. And then we're gonna lie back. So I'm just gonna get myself out along the floor. And if you lose it somewhere between point A and point B, you can always sit back up, set yourself back up, and just get things as you'd have them. And then, when I lie down initially, I have sort of my own like signature moves. Like I have to wiggle my hips a few times. I sort of scrunch along the floor once or twice. And that's basically me trying to take myself from being vertical and upright in the field of gravity to lying back. And then my spine just needs to wiggle out a little bit. So don't let the way that we've tied the toes together prevent you from just getting into a sort of like regulated state on the floor. And then from here, we're not going to do a whole lot for the next few moments, so I'll have to use a lot of words to describe all the things that we're barely doing. You will continue to think about pressing the legs apart. You will continue to experience that resistance with the toes tied together. And as you have this for a few moments, I'm going to have us here long enough so that we can experiment with Try this action, then that action. Try it a little more, try it on one side, then the other. So when we do things and we're there for a while, I have a few reasons for that, but the primary one is that I just want people to encounter themselves. I was just talking before class to another student of mine who's also a physical therapist, and we were kind of like bemoaning, like, oh, it's so hard sometimes. You want to help somebody so dearly, but the thing that they need to learn, they have such a blind spot about it. And it's really, you know, like all the words in the world won't necessarily penetrate until someone just experiences it from the inside out. And so as you're here, what I'm thinking I could guide you towards is this idea that your legs are going to be doing something. It's not much to look at, but you're pressing the legs apart from each other. Like if this were not a yoga strap, but instead a big elastic band, you'd be able to flare the legs miles apart from one another. But since that's restricted and resisted, your hips just have to keep on mulling that over, like, this person's telling me to step apart, but I'm tied together. And what does that end up as? And do you feel it more on one side than the other? Does it create a level of fatigue where you have to back off for a moment? That's fine. But then I'd also have you envision here that you are pressing the backs of your legs closer to the floor. Now your legs are already straight. So if you go to your knee and try to go super straight, I think you'll just make your legs really rigid. So maybe it would be helpful to imagine here that we've come around with like a big pile of sandbags and we're placing them on your thigh bone so that your thighs stay closer to the floor. So there's a stepping out and a pressing down and a stepping out. And you might for a moment kind of blank out your left leg and say, I'll get to you in a second, and really pay your attention to the right side and amplify that. Can you imagine your right leg stepping into the side and your right thigh pressing down into the floor? And then you can thank the right leg for kind of being center stage for a moment, blank that out in your mind's eye, and then go to the left side and say, okay, left leg, you step out. Left leg, you press back. And you might just circulate between those two things, the stepping apart and the pressing down a few more times, and see how that all feels. We'll try it in a different way in just a moment. All right, so from here, you can relax and you can get your feet out of that loop. And if you need a break of some sort, you could do anything that calls your name, bending the knees, a little twist, knees to chest, whatever might feel appealing to you. But we are gonna set ourselves back up for the next thing. So I'm gonna sit up because I don't know where it is. Aha. So we're going to use this loop of elastic. And again, my folks at home, if you are lacking one of these, just use your strap, but you're gonna pull these on like your new favorite pants. And everyone is contoured and shaped differently. So you should edit this as we do it. If I'm using mine at like the middle size, but you end up wanting yours by the knees, awesome. Because it's just gonna relate to our bodies differently. So I am gonna aim for the middle of my thigh. Like maybe it's towards like the knee end slightly. And then I'm gonna come back to reclining. And then once I come down, I'm gonna set my legs probably just a little wider than my hips width distance, not by much, like an inch. Because I want you to set your legs just wide enough that you really perceive that this is an elastic band. And if you're at home and it's not elastic, then you perceive kind of the restriction that band puts around your legs. And so in my mind's eye, in my imagination, I'm putting that toe loop back on, but I don't like to overload people with a million props at the same time. So we won't do both of them unless it's strongly appealed to you. And I'm going to think about pressing my thighs apart within this. Now this has more give because it's elastic. So once I take a couple of breaths with that, my legs are not very widened apart, but they're pressing out. I am then going to lift one leg, move it out to the side by, half of an inch, and then do the same thing with the second leg. So I'm taking here just that slightly widened position. And then again, inside of that, I'm gonna keep on pressing my legs apart. Additionally, like on that first exercise with the toes looped, I'm also going to press my thighs straight down to the floor. And I'm probably doing what a lot of us would do, which is it's like thighs, just, I'm not sure, but do something. And so you might recruit those quads, those four muscles on the front of the thighs. And you might make the thighs like rock solid, really rigid. Now that's a great capability to have, but I'd actually sidestep that if you could, and think here about pressing the back of the hamstrings deeper towards the floor. And again, this is definitely, let's categorize this as like resistance exercise, but like invisible resistance exercise, because there's not much happening right now, but I'll give us some more stuff to do in just a moment. In the next couple of breaths, really thinking about those two actions. Internal resistance, so you're pressing your legs out wider, but they're not going much further. And you're pressing your thighs down to the floor, but they might be as low as they go. And then from here, let's bend into the knees, set the feet to the floor. So I'm going to reposition my resistance band. Folks at home, again, if you don't have this elastic, the next exercise really requires the elastic. So just do the next exercise without anything around your legs. For the rest of us, I'm going to shimmy this so it's a little bit more towards the backs of my knees. But again, edit freely. Once you see where this is going, it's just got to work for you. And I bet each one of us would do it a little bit differently, but we're going to go to knees bent, feet on the floor. You're always welcome just to take a peek if you want to see the preview. And then from here, with knees bent, feet on the floor, I'm going to outstretch my right leg so that it's straight, but my knees are still beside each other. So you could say that this right leg is like on a 45-degree angle. And then my work is going to be on pushing that leg straight down towards the floor, trying to get my right heel, my right calf, my right thigh pretty much against the yoga mat, and then bringing it back up to its starting position, which was with the knees as next door neighbors. And we'll do a few. Caveat as always, I'm never counting these off. We're just doing some. And if you feel like we do an disparate amount on left and right, you can always catch up on one side if you feel compelled to. But we're going to do that undetermined number of these. And if you feel like, oh, that loop is not really providing much resistance, you could hook it like higher over the left knee. You could try a couple of different things. But we'll get a couple more. And everybody in here is functionally strong enough to kind of overpower this elastic band. So it gives you some resistance, but you're strong enough to kind of use momentum and bounce that leg up and down. So you're going fairly slowly. And when you encounter the resistance that the band provides, you kind of slow down a little bit. All right, how about a couple more? Really thinking about bringing the heel bone into the ground, the calf into the ground, the hamstring closer to the floor. We'll do a couple more. And just so you know, the black ones are the harder ones. So if you've got a red one, you might feel sort of smug that you got the lighter resistance. That's fine. And the next time that you have your right leg pressing to the floor, keep that. And then it's probably not by a whole heck of a lot. Maybe it's just an imagined movement, but could you take your left foot off the floor like you're about to take your left knee to your chest? Yeah. But you're still gonna press the right leg down to the ground, right leg down to the ground. Left foot came off the floor a little bit. And then right leg super straight, Katie. Yeah. You're in a bad spot because I can see every move. All right, and then left foot returns to the floor, right knee bends. And if you need an intermission, here's the time for it, right? Like shake it out. I always offer, but no one ever does. Run a lap around the building. We're going to come back to this on the second side. So starting with the knees bent, feet on the floor. And again, folks at home, no elastic band. then go without, and you're just creating your own slowness. And then left leg starts by extending. The knees are side by side, the leg is straight. And then you'll go slowly through a set of these. And again, I'm not counting. You could if you wanted to. Ooh, this is my tougher side. Bringing my left heel and left calf, and I'm imagining the back of my left thigh, though it does not quite get there, to the floor. And again, you're strong enough to kind of just like bounce up and down, right? Like everybody in here has enough power in their body to do that. So this light resistance, this elastic, I think it's so good for yogis because it's like it slows us down a little bit, makes us pay slightly more attention, but it's all pretty manageable. So when you're pushing your leg down, that action is called hip extension. It's just does not show up very much in most of our modes of modern living. We live in a very flexion-oriented world. And so it might just be off the grace of having an elastic on your leg, but you might find the lift of the leg like a little swifter. That's fine. Slow it down when you're pressing back. Again, that's hip extension. Requires the back of the body to be real powered up. Okay. And the next time that you have that left leg down, keep it there. And even though there's this little sling that's trying to lift it from the floor, resist that. Heel down, calf down, back of the thigh down. And then maybe even just barely, could you lift your right foot from the floor? It's like knee to chest is what I'm thinking of, but I'm not even getting a fraction of the way there. Yeah. So left leg even flatter to the mat, flat to the mat. And then like right knee is daydreaming of picking up towards your chest. Am I the only one struggling? Okay, good. Ooh, all right, and then I'll bring all the drama. I'll do all the grunting if you want me to. Let's bend into both knees and take a breath or two here. All right, so let's take this strap off from around the legs. And again, here's your little intermission. If you just need to like pull your knees and rock from side to side or drop your legs from left to right, great, take a moment to do that, whatever your back or hips are asking for. It's a good moment to just feel it from the inside out and then address it with whatever little intuitive movement, or just take a pause. All right. Well, let's find our way from being on our backs to turning over to one side. And we're going to come all the way up to standing. And I think just because of, having a camera in the room and people facing in different directions, we're going to come to stand. You're going to step your feet far apart and just have everyone face into the middle of the room. So you might be looking at neighbors, but that's no problem here. And that way I can kind of be within most people's line of vision pretty easily. And we're just going to start by taking like the wide, you're on the fence. You can go either way. But I'd like you to take, well, let's do this in 3 portions. So I won't max it out from the start. So we're going to think about taking like small, medium, and large stances with the feet. So you're going to start with your feet apart, but we're going to call this like the smallest of the 3. And just for a moment here, some people stand like this anyway. They're solid. You can't knock these people over. So if you ever see anybody standing like this, like, okay, they're in charge. So if you have this sort of like A-frame stance, you're pretty like solid on your feet. I kind of like it. So what I want you to think about here, even if this is not how you stand, because it's not for me, I tend to stand with my feet very close. Can you stand up to your full height? Like, can you find just good posture while you're standing? Roll the shoulders back and down, and just get a sense of what it feels like to have this wide-ish, but not our widest stance. And again, for me, this is not my natural habitat. Like if I was here for much longer, like even subconsciously, I'd bring my feet towards each other. So let's go to the next wider stance again. We're going to do it in 3 portions. So wider still, but tolerably so. And as you're here, can you still find like the habits of standing well, good posture? And just getting a sense of what it feels like to have the feet further apart. So with the feet a little bit wider than hips width distance, where we were a moment ago, a lot of us are pretty solid, but the further we go apart, we get a little bit imbalanced, because the stuff that we could recruit for our hips for stability starts to be a little disadvantaged. So let's go to our widest, but it doesn't have to be like comically wide, like you're about to end up in the splits stance for yourself. And again, as you come into this, I do hope there's a little balance challenge, but one that's easily resolved. You don't want to feel like you're about to pitch over. And I hope there's like a slight edge of like what I like to think of as like a comfortable awkwardness to it. Like you don't choose to stand with your feet this far apart. So there's a sort of unfamiliarity, but it's something you can still again manage and contain. And taking a few breaths here again, can you stand with like your best knowledge about your best posture? Right, and then whatever way that it works for you, some people like to do what I do, which is kind of like heel toe a few times. You're gonna take your feet back in, and we're gonna keep this wide stance in mind. I'd like you to bring a block on its taller side to either end of the mat. And then once more, what I'd like you to find is somewhere between like 2 and 3, like your medium wide stance and then your super wide stance. Like where can you find a place where you feel pretty stable on your feet? Okay, and we're gonna turn the right leg so that it points all the way out. Yep, so it points to the short end of your yoga mat. And then your left leg, just angle it in a couple of times here so that you feel stability. Nice. And then from here, we'll uplift our arms, and the person across from you will be going the opposite way, so don't try to mimic what they're doing. And then with an inhale breath, can you again stand tall? Now your arms are in midair, but I like to imagine that they're kind of like resting on like, I don't know, bookshelves at that height or some sort of rest or column that I could press my hands onto. And I'll use that to stand myself up taller, much like the way we literally pressed our fingers onto the floor earlier. And then from here, reach out sideways towards the right, like you're trying to bring that right hand a mile past your right foot. Then find that block, move it in so it's conveniently located. Place your left hand under your left waist or hip. Yeah. Excellent. So your right foot is pointing all the way to the short end of your yoga mat. Yeah. And then that left foot behind you has just kind of kicked in a little bit to facilitate that. So that means the heel is turning out, toes are turning in. Awesome. We're going to take a couple of breaths right here. If it works for you, you can take that top arm straight up from the shoulder. If it's made simpler by hanging onto your waist or hip, I would sustain that, but you might be content enough to go for that upstretching position. If the arm is upstretched, the palm is facing the same direction that your nose is pointing. So to the windows if you're near the bolster wall, and to the bolsters if you're near the window wall. And then let's take a long inhaling breath. And with your exhale, let's lift all the way up, all the way on out. And we're back up to a wide stance. Then we're gonna turn our legs around for the other direction. So left toes turn all the way out, left toes point at the short end of your mat, right leg angles in. Excellent. And then from here, arms come up. And again, though they're floating in midair, could you imagine patting down something with your hand so that your chest could lift up taller? We'll breathe in, we'll exhale, slide over, reach over, hand comes down. And again, if it's more convenient or just simpler for the totality of the pose, keep your right hand on your right hip. Otherwise, that arm can reach up. Nice. And as we give this a few breaths, could you imagine here that your legs are still pushing apart from each other? hopefully your yoga mat isn't that slippery that were you to imagine pushing your feet apart that they actually did slide. I used to have a yoga mat like that. It was a real liability. But getting that sense that you could still like hop the feet further still. We won't do it, but you want to be able to feel that accessibility. And let's take a long inhale, big exhale. We'll come all the way back on up. And then one more time, we're going to turn the right leg all the way out. Left leg angles in. And then instead of keeping this front leg straight, we're going to put that into a bend. And what I often notice is that if you bend your knee, people will scrunch that leg forward just to kind of keep some space for the pose. There is not a preset prescribed, like your feet need to be 72 inches apart. There's just a sense here that when you are bending into your knee that you're sitting down lower. Excellent. And then one more time, we're going to take those arms up and out. One more time, we're going to reach over like we're diving into the right side. And one more time, we're going to make sure that block is conveniently located. And then from here, you can either take the arm up and over, long stretch alongside that left ear. If it's a matter of simplicity, I would just put the hand in like a back pocket. Right. But as you get into this, can you still get that sense that that front knee is bending? Yeah, could you bend that front knee until the shin is vertical, straight up and down? Yeah. And as you're here for the next 2 longest breaths of your life, could you stretch that back leg straighter? Yes. Can you imagine that that back left leg is pressing behind you, almost like when you are pressing your leg towards the floor? All right, let's inhale, exhale, and again, we'll come all the way on up. En route, you can straighten that right leg in do-si-do. We're going to turn the feet around. And then the arms come up. We'll take that deep knee bend. We'll breathe in. Exhale, slide over like you're trying to reach a mile past your foot. And then again, make sure that block is where you need it. Hand to hip waist or that long stretch up and over. And then once you've like committed to the general shape of the poses you have, it's too late now, you're doing the pose. You gotta commit to it. Can you make sure that that front knee just bends? Yeah, and arch, what you just did with your ankle, I would do it a little bit more. So the toes turn, yeah, just like that, you got it. Excellent. And we'll give it another couple of inhales and exhales. And make the back leg straighten. Can you imagine the thigh of that right leg pushing behind you, just like when we were lying down and trying to push one leg to the floor? Same thing, just you're up and about, we've changed the orientation. These look good. I wonder if there isn't a slightly longer stance in there, Britt, for you. All right, we'll inhale and exhale, come all the way on up. All right, and then we'll again shimmy, shimmy those feet on in. And then just face forward. You can come to the head of your mat. Anybody change their mind about windows yet? I have actually, so. I never used to get overheated when I taught, but I got older and then I've had a mask on. It gets really humid right there. All right, so as you're standing at the front of your mat, we're gonna take Tadasana. It's like the least glamorous of all of our yoga poses, but a really functional posture. Like there will be times when you just have to stand there. And so as you're here, is there a sense of like waiting for the next bigger move? Like, is there like an inherent, like, let's wrap this up and do something else with the body? Or could you simply stand, pay attention, we'll think about those shoulders angling back, trying to expose this area just around the collarbones. You don't have to like hoist yourself up. It's not like a militaristic stiffness, but there's this sense that When the shoulders angle back, could you get this lift across the very, very top chest? Fingertips reach towards the floors. And then notice how the soles of your feet are in contact with the floor. You know, they're really sensitized, the soles of your feet. Most of the time we don't have to consider it. But when you're on your feet, if you tuned in a little bit, you might be able to notice, oh yeah, I'm heavier on one side, or I tend to lean forward. A lot of us do that. So as you're here, can you carry the weight of your pose by moving your hips back slightly behind you? So the heel bones and like the backs of the heel bones are heavier than the toes. And that might require a little management, right? Like my natural stance is like forward and slightly off to the right. So when I come to put myself in Tadasana, it's like, I have to get there. And maintaining it requires that level of attention that kind of makes it yoga. And then for a couple of breaths, I want you to consciously shift the weight from one foot to the other. It doesn't matter which way you go first. And even though it's sort of like you're in slow motion on a boat, even though you're becoming asymmetrically oriented for a moment, can you keep that sense of standing tall? And over the next couple, we'll think about doing a little bit less with like the head tipping, less with the shoulders moving. And like really, it's like across the pelvis. It's like my hips are living just to the right. And then back to center. I've got all these good creaky spots in the room. And then over to the left. And then a couple more, making it like as small as possible. Like you can feel your hips moving, but like in everyone else's peripheral vision, they're not sure that you're actually in motion. So like the smallest, least perceptible from the outside movement of the pelvis from side to side. Probably happens when you're walking. And the next time that you have snuck up on it, shifting your hips over towards the right, can you from here bend into that left knee and lift the foot off the floor? So you're just kind of standing like flamingo style for just a moment. And then we're going to bring that foot back on down. And then like sneak up on it, shift your weight onto the left. And as soon as there's enough weight on that left leg to pick up the right foot, you pluck that from the floor. The best advice I can give when you're working on balance is just don't think that much about it. Like the more you're like, why is this ankle? It's like, as soon as that starts to happen, it's gone. All right, and then we're gonna add to this. So what I'd like you to do is have your two blocks nearby. I'm gonna show from the side, just in case anybody at home likes the profile view. So I'm a taller person. This height works okay for me. If you're not as tall or you just wanna play it a little lower and flatter, you're just gonna create like a little stair step, though you're not gonna put weight on this. And I'm gonna put it in front of my right foot. And again, just that barely perceptible shift of weight. I'm gonna put just like my toes on this little spot. If this feels high for you, then just keep on reconfiguring this. So higher is not necessarily better, it's just gotta fit you. And again, it's not steady enough. I wouldn't have anybody try to step up on this. And you guys know that. There's no reckless yogi in here. But what I'd like you to think of in this is like, it's sturdy enough that you can step into it lightly. So even though we wouldn't hop right up on top of this, you can put a little downwards pressure. And with that downwards pressure of the right toe or toes on that block or blocks, I want you to use that to stand yourself taller and to back up your hips. So if you found a way to stand here by leaning your pelvis forward, you're going to move your hips back and back and back and back. And when I throw a glance over my shoulder, of course, I can see my folks in the room, but I can also see myself on camera. And this to me is like super comfortable slouching forward. It's like I could stand here for minutes on end. And when I correct it and I can confirm that on the screen, oh, it's so much harder work. So toes pressing down, standing leg is moving back. And even just like sticking out your butt a little bit in the pose. All right, let's step off of that. You can side shift, arrange yourself so your left foot can come on top of this. And again, if you need to look at this happen, you can, but could you even just find that little edifice you created with the tip of your toe, not even your eyes, but if you need to see it, to believe it, that works too. And again, it's just not even sturdy enough to actually put much weight on, which I'd never have to say that to you. Your nervous system knows that, even if we weren't sure. Like if I just put these blocks in the room and I said, hey, put your foot on this, within half a second, your foot would be like, yeah, but I'm not going to stand on that. It's too wobbly. But you can push. And you might even imagine that it's not a block, it's a spring. And if you could push down, there's maybe a little opposite and equal reaction. You might stand up a little taller. And then after you feel like, okay, I've got some height going to the upstairs of the pose, I want you to think about moving your hips back. Like really in plain speak, it's like stick out your butt a little bit, because you'll be more balanced here, but your low back and the front of your hip have to really like hold compression. Whereas when you shift back a little bit, you're actually going to find here like load bearing straight down through that hip joint. Good, and again, pushing downwards. Imagine it's got a little spring loaded action in it. Woo. Can you move the hips back and press down? All right, still a balance pose. Okay, so let's come off from there. You can set these aside. Folks in the studio, we'll just use this bit of elastic because I like it for this one. Folks at home, if you don't have this, it's just your regular strap. And a very similar place to go. You're going to weight shift like that smallest amount possible to get the left foot heavier, and then bring up your right knee. And I'm just holding the two ends of it with a little bit of this right around my shin. So I'm not stepping into it. I'm not doing anything too fancy. And then once you get there, and you could use a strap instead, Nina, if that felt like a better use. Again, the easiest way to do it is like this, right? So it's just that I'm sort of leaning into this. But what you might want to find once you have some moment of stability, yes, a couple of you are choosing to use the regular strap, that's just as good. You're going to straighten your standing leg and move your hips back. And you can bend your elbows if you want this knee up higher. That makes it feel a little bit more contained for me. Good. And the hips back, and the hips back, and the hips back. Back them up. Good. Awesome. Fantastic. All right. Drop it, shake it out to the other side. So keep the band if you like it. But so the advantage of having the strap, which is why I've mentioned it as another variation on it, because I'm never putting like one prop above the other. They're all just variations on a theme, is that it's longer, right? So if it's hard for me to reach forward with straight arms, then like having the length makes it a little bit nicer. So that's the advantage of that. Either one's fine. So the smallest amount of weight shift over onto the right leg that you could possibly create. And then you're going to pick up that left knee. Bonus points to anybody who can remember to move their shoulders back and down. Haven't mentioned that in 25 minutes, but I meant to. And then once you have this, what you want to get a sense of is that instead of leaning into the pelvis and moving the shoulders back, which I guarantee you will find more stable until it's not, is that you're going to bring your pelvis behind you. So that back edge of the heel bone is just the darn heaviest thing in the whole pose. I know it feels like that lifting leg is heavier. Ooh. Contagious. Usually I'm very stable in this one, but you guys are making me wobble. What? It's like a shockwave that goes through the room. All right, let's go ahead and come on down and we'll shake that out. So let's return to the floor. Let's add that blanket for the head as we generally do when we're reclining back. And then your second blanket, I'm going to take it, here's the storage fold. From storage fold, I'm going to fold it into thirds from a long edge. So a little like business letter for a business size envelope fold. And where that will go is to the backs of my thighs. So not into the knees and not right up at the bottom of your cheeks, somewhere in the middle of all that. And as I'm always saying, oh, sweet sigh, we're lying down. As I'm always saying, like edit the prop. And there isn't really like a standard usage of this. So what I want you to find, and this is how you kind of make the choices to edit, is like, when you're here, can you really push your thighs straight down into that blanket? Like if it's too thin, you might feel like, oh, I can barely touch it. But with it folded into thirds, I think many of us will find that like, oh yeah, it's right there at the backs of my thighs. And so what I want you to imagine here is like you could just keep on smushing flatter and flatter that blanket, like flat like a pancake, because you have the ability to push backwards with your legs. And again, it might be that your legs, your hips, your pelvis, they're all very ardent yoga students. And so when an instruction is given, they're just like, well, I'll do this. And you might revert to just kind of doing the same thing you always do, which is like squeezing your quads, tensing the fronts of your thighs, squeezing your kneecaps. So the idea here, and again, let's file this under like one of those things that you're doing, but nobody else would really see in a big manner, that you're pushing just straight backwards, meaning you're using those hip extensors. It's just that the floor, a blanket, they're right in the way. You couldn't lower your legs any further, but your muscles and joints don't know that. They just keep endeavoring quite contentedly, right? Shake it out like you're just in Shavasana for a moment, just like let the legs waggle, let them rest. And then keep the left leg at rest. Roll the right toes to point towards the ceiling. Keep that right heel bone on the floor and press more firmly with the right thigh. So we're just gonna do it single-sided. Right thigh pressing back, pressing back. And then the right leg gets a moment just to rest and flop over, and then recruit that left one. So point the left toes towards the ceiling, and then push the left thigh to the blanket and the left heel to the floor. Sometimes I've taught this and like someone will just like lift their foot off the floor. But that's actually that quad muscle again, like making the knee super straight. And what we're looking for is the back of the thigh to pull that leg flatter and flatter still. All right, and then both legs get a rest. And then one last time, we'll do the two at once. So it is heel bones down. I want your heels to press into the floor. But then also the backs of the thighs press into the floor. And if you feel the backs of the thighs, those hamstring muscles, engage a little bit, that's good. That's what we're kind of like knocking on the door, see if anyone will answer. It's the moment when the front of the thigh like goes gazing. That's when we know we've sort of just like electrocuted the legs and they're just responding to everything. Right, and then once more, you can let your legs relax. So I love this blanket where it is for Shavasana, for our resting pose. To me, that is like delightful. But that doesn't mean everyone loves it. So you could remove this, you could swap it out for a bolster. You could come up with something altogether different because we're going to lay in rest for a few moments. And the name of the pose is Shavasana. And you will often hear me say, if it's not comfortable, it's not Shavasana. So the idea being that at the end of a yoga class, when we've done a bunch of physical and intellectual things, that there's a phase of the practice where we attempt to untie the active mind from the body. And it's not that like we really want to feel like totally disembodied and totally disconnected from ourselves, though that might be an effect of rest. But more that you want to be able to experience the full range in your nervous system. We thought about things, we did bigger movements, we did smaller, refined ones. We balanced on one foot, we laid on the floor. And so here, what we're looking for is that moment where you can find that bit of comfort in the stillness. We'll stay for a few minutes, and the next time you hear me speaking, I'll be bringing us back from this pose. Begin to lengthen your breath here so that you can encounter for a few cycles the slowness and the rise and the fall. That longer breath may then care to translate into a little bit of movement, whatever gently brings you back to a sense of being in your body in this space. There is no rush nor any hurry, but when you are ready, you can make the movements that take you from your back to your side and then from your side to sitting. And once you're sitting up, we'll bring the hands together to that prayer position. You could join me if you cared to in closing with a chant. The word is Shanti. It means peace, and symbolically we repeat it 3 times for peace within our own hearts, then within our relationships, and for peace on earth. And you're welcome to simply listen in. We'll take up an inhale breath here. Om. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om. And here you could lower your chin towards your chest, looking with your head towards your heart, and thank yourself for reserving a little time and energy to be with your yoga practice this morning. Excellent work. Namaste. If you have any questions, you can let me know. Otherwise, we will see you soon. Nice to have you here. Yeah, you're welcome.